Hello and welcome to JCT's Fascinating Hobbies. I'm recording this today, today being Saturday, as I received this yesterday and just wanted to let you all have a bit of a look at it. So one of my favourite cars that I've owned was a 1998 Vauxhall Omega 2.5 CDX, also known as the Omega B. The Opel Omega, with substantial modification, it formed the basis of the VZ Holden Commodore. So what I've got here is an actual launch pack. So with the launch pack, you've got this rather nice black cardboard folder. You have this road test report, which covers some of the important road tests that Autocar conducted, including also the bad points, and I do agree with them with gear shift quality on the 2 litre. It was quite notchy, but surprisingly precise once warmed up. It was sort of quite a manly sort of rear-wheel drive feeling gearbox. I think it was a Getrag 5-speed, if I remember rightly, so it was a sturdy transmission. So the one thing that was quite nice about the Omega was not only the shape, which I always thought was a very pleasing looking, sort of handsome looking car, but also the handling. It sort of handled surprisingly well for its size. It's rear wheel drive, obviously, but if you look at the engine bay, the engine, especially on the V6 version, was set very far back. So you've got the scuttle here, and the engine is sort of pretty much underneath the scuttle, so it is set quite far back in the engine bay, and that actually sort of gave you a very good weight distribution. You had semi-trailing arms at the rear, McPherson struts at the front, and overall it gave a very sort of pleasing sort of handling setup. The only problem with so the whole setup was the steering was a bit vague. It used steering box rather than the rack and pinion. Funny enough, the Holden Commodore used a rack and pinion setup. But, you know, even with the steering box in place, you could sort of get some quite sort of pleasing results handling-wise from the car. And it was very controllable on the limit. Even if you went over the limit, it was very controllable, especially in the V6 models, particularly controllable on the throttle. I speak from experience on wet roundabouts during my more sort of carefree days. But it was a very pleasant, comfortable car to drive, especially in V6 automatic form. Very nice car indeed. It replaced both the Senator and the Carlton models, or Omega A models. And you had the top line Elite model, which replaced the Senator 24 valve. Although for a short time Cadillac did offer the 1998 onwards STS in the UK in right-hand drive form, and I believe, if I recall correctly, that was actually offered through certain Vauxhall dealers as a top-line model above the Omega Elite. They didn't sell particularly well, but they were an option that was quite unusual in the marketplace at the time, being a front-wheel drive V8 engined American car. Now the Omega was up against what I would class as the the mainstream executives. So it was up against the likes of the absolutely stunning Alfa Romeo 164, the equally interesting Citroën XM 2 litre, the tried and trusted Granada 2 litre, the alternative Peugeot 605, and the Rover 820. And it, you know, sort of in this particular lineup, it was pretty much the only one, apart from the Granada, which offered a rear-wheel drive chassis. It was a very popular car with the police, mainly due to the aforementioned handling traits and performance. And certainly it sold well in the sector. I mean, when you compared it to sort of older models such as the Granada and the Rover 800 series, it certainly sort of competed very well against both those vehicles, and in many ways was a lot better, certainly than the Granada and also the Rover 820. There was also an estate version shown here with the older Senator alloys, which I don't think ever made it onto proper production Omegas, and the estate version was particularly spacious and a fairly prestige choice in the market. Also, there was use of the 2.5 litre BMW diesel. That engine also saw it make its way into the Range Rover P38A, and obviously the Omega, BMW 3 Series, BMW 5 Series. So there was also a test of the Elite model as well, which was a very nice top line option. Very quickly, so they went from the 15-inch alloys shown here onto 16-inch alloys. But yeah, a very nice vehicle in general. Made a change from the old straight 6 that was in the Senator to this V6 engine here that first saw the light of day in the UK market, I believe, in the V6 Cavalier in 2.5 litre form, and it's shown here in, I think that's in 3 litre form. Later 3 litres had a slightly different plenum chamber design, where the plenum actually came over. It was a sort of a different shape, and that was sort of one way you could differentiate between a 2.5 and a 3 litre, was by the shape of that plenum chamber. Very reliable engine on the whole. Mistaken quite often for head gasket failure, because the header tank, which you can see here, would often fill up with oil on the earlier examples. And the reason for that is hidden in between the V. So you take this off, you take off the inlet trunks, inlet tract, trumpets, manifold, etc. You take off the plastic frame that sort of mounts that to the block, and you've got in between all of that a plate with 2 pipes going into it. And those 2 pipes go over to this side of the engine just above the oil filter, and those pipes are actually part of the oil cooler setup. So the oil cooler sits in the V, which is a good and bad location for it. It's good because it warms up the oil quicker, making the engine more efficient far more quickly. It's bad because you can sort of have, under extreme conditions, cooling problems on those 2 rear cylinders, but also the earlier ones, which were not made of stainless steel, were known to go porous, filling their header tank with oil and making it look like a head gasket failure. There's also a heater valve around this sort of area here, which also cause problems and cause the cooling system to pressurise, again looking like head gasket failure. You actually find, if you remove this scuttle here, the whole engine bay becomes so much more accessible, and to do sort of routine servicing such as plugs, etc., becomes a far more pleasant experience. The coil pack on the earlier models lives around here, and it is subjected to occasionally sort of, if the scuttle hasn't been refitted properly, water leaking in, damaging the coil pack and causing a misfire condition. And it was sort of these sort of niggling faults that meant they sort of did go for sort of quite low prices in the early 2000s, and sort of didn't really hold their value, being a large mainstream executive car, but also with a sort of a perceived level of unreliability and over complexity. But when you actually start digging into them, they're not actually that bad, and they're not actually that bad to work on, just so long as you take your time and acknowledge that the majority of work that you're going to be doing on them is going to be a pain in the arse. Albeit a pain in the arse that you can get around. Also, part of the pack, you've got these rather nice photographs. This one here is a, I want to say a CDX estate, I think it is. What's also quite nice is you've got what you could basically have each of these trim levels in. The Select was a bizarre one. It was only available in 2 litre 16 valve and 2.5 litre diesel, and it was basically below the GLS, but from what I understand, I want to say that the options book was open. You could spec it up to be how you wanted, but I'm not 100% certain. I'm not just sure if it was just a trim level or if it was a trim level that had a range of options you could add on. GLS was sort of lower middle of the range, CD was upper middle, CDX is where it started to get interesting, and the Elite was your top line. We've also got a rather nice picture here of the Omega Elite saloon with its special alloys, special treatment on the side, and also its high-end Philips amplified stereo. Also has, if I remember rightly, self-leveling rear suspension, which is basically a pair of air shocks with a sensor mounted to one of the trailing links, and there was a pump in the engine bay, an electric pump which activated pumping up the rear end. Funny enough, my CDX had that, and the stereo was an optional extra fitted by the original owner, so it sounds like somebody had ticked a load of boxes on the CDX that I had. So the CDX that I had was near Elite spec. It was missing the leather electric seats, and that was about it. The CD saloon was sort of where you started to get quite interesting in the range. Certainly it was available with the all of the engine options, I believe, except the 3 litre. In fact, I think only the CDX and the later MV6 and the ex-police cars that were sort of GLS spec were also available with the 3 litre. I've got a shot of the interior. The leather seats do look very inviting, but the leather, albeit very hard wearing, was not the best quality leather. It was sort of quite plasticky, but it looked nice, and you know, it was very sort of comfortable to sit on, in all honesty. In fact, in general, the whole car was very comfortable. So this gives you an option, sorry, an idea of which engines were available. So yeah, you could see you could get the 2.5 from GLS grade upwards. You could also get, and this was very unusual for the time, the diesel was available across every trim option, and that was something that it took a little while for a large number of manufacturers to actually catch on to, but it was certainly something that Vauxhall were ahead of the game there, offering all engines pretty much across every trim level. The 2 litre was not available on the CDX or Elite, but the diesel was available across all of the range options, including the Elite. So if you wanted a diesel top of the range model, you could have it. And there we go. And obviously the 3 litre was reserved exclusively for the Elite, and later for the sporty MV6, which is basically CDX grade, and also the police versions, which were generally GLS type trim grade, unless you went for certain sort of ex-police cars which were actually Elite spec. Usually the ex-police ones are also manual as well, so that sort of provided a bit of extra driving entertainment. And there we go. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and also consider subscribing for more upcoming fascinating hobbies. Thank you very much for watching.